sudden, we took off.
The Pirates won it.
They've won 8 of their past 9 games.
And the road goes on forever. And I've got one more silver dollar. But I'm not gonna let them catch me, no. Not gonna let them catch the midnight rider.
We are family, and that's the best way to explain it. They all really pull together and root for each other.
By early August, the Pirates had climbed into first place in the National League East.
The Buccos have done it. How about it?
And the Bucks family was the talk of Pittsburgh and well beyond.
Forever. And I've got one more silver dollar. But I'm not gonna let them catch me, no. Not gonna let them catch the midnight rider.
Welcome to the 70s versus the 80s, my babies. And if you ever had to move your family's 3,000-pound Zenith television 3 feet away from the wall just so you could help the television repairman change a bulb out in the back of the cathode ray tube, just so your mom could watch that brand new episode of Knots Landing, you know, she was stressing, but she's happy now. If that ever happened to you, this is the podcast for you. And we got a hot episode for you today, so we got to get right into it. We are joined by New York Times bestselling author Allman Paul. He just wrote a new book, Brothers and Sisters, the Allman Brothers Band, and the inside story of the album that defined the 70s. So we're going to talk the beginning of Southern rock. We're going to talk the largest music festival where the most Americans ever gathered on one field. And we're going to talk 1979, We Are Family, Pittsburgh Pirates, and all the crazy antics they had with them, and who was crazier, them or the 1987 Minnesota Twins. And we also have a trivia game where we have all the brothers and sisters. So we got the Allman Brothers, we got the Doobie Brothers, we got Sister Sledge, and we got Twisted Sister. They're facing off in a trivia game that's going to blow your socks off. So let's get to it. All right, Brian, so did you want to start us off?
Well, I was going to start us off by saying, you know, as I walk around and people recognize me from the 70s versus the 80s podcast, they like to say, well, why you keep talking about stuff from the 70s and 80s? It's not hip, or it's not something that would make the New York Times bestsellers list. But au contraire, we have found out that there is an interest in music from the 70s. There's a book. It's the Brothers and Sisters, the inside story of the Allman Brothers and the album that defined a decade about the 1970s. You think, okay, 1970s, but it's made the New York Times bestseller list. So I went out and I bought it on hardcover, and I'm reading it. And Mike, you went and you got the audiobook, is that correct?
Yes, the audio version with actual recordings from members of the group.
Yeah, once I found out about that, I was
you got a little
jealous.
Envious. Yeah.
So we've brought a special guest in today, and I'm just going to introduce him as Alan. And Alan, what's your involvement, or how are you consuming this book, Brothers and Sisters, the inside look at the album defined the 1970s?
I'm sick of this book. I have nothing left to say about it. No, I wrote the book and I read the audiobook, as a matter of fact, and I'm not sick of it, really. It's been my life for the last 2-3 years, and I was intrigued by it before I started, and as I was writing the book, I started to think. I started somewhere in there. I got really excited and started to feel like I was really onto something, and so it was a blast. I mean, really, it was. This is my 4th book. I think it's the most fun I've had writing a book. Also, in a way, it was the hardest because there was so much research. Because there's so many rabbit holes that, if you've read it, goes into the history of Southern rock. It goes into, obviously the Allman Brothers history. I was more familiar with, but I learned so much. And then, their involvement with the Jimmy Carter campaign, which has been really interesting. The book's been out for a couple of months now, and I've realized that it's such a split. So many people didn't know that he was involved, that they were involved in his campaign, which is sort of a surprise to me because it's something I've known forever. I feel like, although I learned a lot and I got a lot deeper in this book, that a lot of people don't know anything about it. So that was interesting, and the history of the Grateful Dead, the Watkins Glen. There were so many different tangents, which is sort of a reflection of the fact that in this period, I'll say roughly 72 to 76, the Allman Brothers were very central to American culture, which is how they could have so many things spitting off of them that were interesting and relevant. So, so I'll cut to the chase too, 70s over the 80s for sure, even though I myself am actually a child of the 80s.
Well, when we compare things from the 70s and the 80s, we usually find out that the 70s win. We were both, pre-teens in the 70s. We were teenagers in the 80s, so maybe we're just more fond of the memories from the 70s versus 80s when you're an awkward teenager.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I think I'm in the same age range as you guys, and it's interesting. At the time, I didn't probably think about it that much one way or the other, or certainly analyze it, but I definitely was more attracted to things from my youth and from maybe, I have an older brother, partly, some of the stuff that he liked. And, the 70s were still the hangover from the 60s. And, so stuff like in 1973, what we're talking about when Brothers and Sisters came out, in a lot of ways probably has more to do with 1968 or 69 than it has to do with 1978 in a weird way. It's that transitional period. But it was really fun. I've gotten great reviews for the book, thank God. But the one thing that even like a lot of positive reviews did nitpick me on was the subtitle saying the album that defined the 70s, which, if I had really, really thought it through, I probably wouldn't have used it. But I can defend it, and I will defend it. But the only reason I say that is because I feel like focusing on that or having to be defensive about that is sort of a waste of time. I just would wish that reviews could just focus on the material of the book instead of that. I come from magazines, like I worked at Guitar World magazine for years, and we would just make cover lines like, the album that defined the greatest albums of the year, the greatest guitarists of the decade. And it's each one was just sort of designed to sell that magazine. It never even really occurred to me that anyone took it seriously. But that's my own cynical commercial view. But I did feel like it defined the 70s in this because of the relationship with Jimmy Carter, probably more than anything, and the fact that it launched Southern rock, even though, I would argue it itself is probably not Southern rock. Songs like Southbound are the start of that. It's the one Allman Brothers song, and it's, of course, on Brothers and Sisters that you could call Southern rock. But it was the inspiration, certainly commercially, for record companies to start taking Southern bands seriously. Leonard Skinner's debut, pronounced Leonard Skinner, came out the same week as Brothers and Sisters. And they sort of took off as the Allman Brothers were petering out. But their success was definitely kickstarted by the success of Brothers and Sisters. So I think Southern rock, Leonard Skinner, The Outlaws, Marshall Tucker, the bands that spun off from the success of Brothers and Sisters, really did define rock and roll in the 70s, or at least one aspect of it, of the second half of the 70s, and then the Jimmy Carter thing. To me, the second half of the 70s, Jimmy Carter in American culture is, a dominant figure. So,
yeah. And I was just going to say, and that was kind of, Jimmy Carter was kind of the end of that rock, because we kind of had a little thing called disco. I mean, so then all of a sudden rock was kind of on the back burner for a couple during the Carter administration almost. But
yeah, and that's probably why guys like us came of age in that era and related more back to the 70s. Although a lot of disco, I was definitely like a disco sucks kid, I guess, but a lot of it sounds pretty great now,
Yeah.
I know that we're going to talk about the Pirates and baseball. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I don't mean to like jump the gun on where you want to go, but since we're talking about disco, We Are Family, my sister Sledge was a defining song of my youth because it became the theme song of the 1979 Pirates, and that's disco, but it was produced and I think written by Nile Rodgers, the genius who also did Chic, and then produced Let's Dance with David Bowie, and through that they brought Stevie Ray Vaughan in. So nothing is ever simple. He gave David Bowie a renewed career with some not disco but sort of dance club vibes and beats, but they brought Stevie Ray Vaughan to attention. So. And We Are Family, I mean, I'm biased towards because of all the great memories I have associated with it, but I think it's legit a pretty great song. So nothing is simple. It's more a matter of like what you like and don't like. And in the moment, it's really easy to get caught up in the, disco sucks, rock is great.
It's like all part of a continuum when you go from like Sly and the Family Stone and start down that path and get to the stuff that you mentioned where... two kinds of music, right? Good music.
Again, is Nile Rodgers. I mean, that has guitars, bass, and drums. And of course keyboards. It's not. It's rock and roll compared to a lot of
electronic
rock and pop now. It's just done in a studio on Pro Tools. Doesn't have any real instruments on it. So, I think with perspective and age and years, things can change a little bit. Viewpoints can change.
We're kids of Saturday Night Live too. It debuted when we were 75, and I know that early on there was a skit where I don't know if it was Aykroyd was playing Carter, and he was doing a hotline, and someone was on an acid trip, and he's like, they're trying to talk him down. He's like, "You got some Allman Brothers there?" So I remember it being part of the pop culture and part of with Jimmy Carter going back to the early Saturday Night Live years.
Yeah, that's an absolute classic, and people bring that up with me a lot, and I do regret that I didn't find a way to get that mentioned in the book because it is an example of that. There's other things. If you watch that skit, there are things that I never noticed before that I noticed now because I went so deep into researching Carter. And one of the things that people criticized him for at the time, and I think this has faded because everything's become more polarized, so people view him more on the big picture things. But he was really, really got involved in everything. He was very hands-on, sometimes too much. There was a criticism of him that he didn't delegate enough. He would just get into the weeds of every line of every treaty and things like that. And they make fun of that in that skit. I hadn't remembered that because I was so focused. It's a Collins skit, and people are calling in and saying like, my TV reception's bad, and he's giving them directions on how to go up on the roof and fix the antenna and things like that. So that had gone completely over my head before I did this research on Jimmy Carter. I was just focused on the very funny bit about the bad acid trip. He says, "Do you ever eat a peach? Go get it. No, sit down, calm down."
The years before the internet, and then people writing, there's been like kind of a bonanza of Allman Brothers books. Back when I was a teen and in between the breakup and the reformation, and I'd be talking to anyone's ears off about the Allman Brothers, and they got sick of me doing it. And I remember we were in '89 at college, there was like a battle of the bands while we were having some kind of picnic, and of the 8 bands, 4 of them played Allman Brothers songs, and it's like, see, they are influential. I'm not just some crazy, hippie stuck in the wrong decade.
Yeah, that's great. I don't remember hearing that at my college. Where did you go to college?
I went to St. John's University up in Collegeville, Minnesota, and
middle of nowhere. Yeah,
middle of nowhere. Yep.
Cool. Well, I was at the University of Michigan, and I don't remember here. I would have loved that. I went through a period more or less in college, where I didn't listen to the Allman Brothers too much, just because I was exploring new and different things. I never quit loving them. I mean, I had been into them really since I was like 12. But they were a little bit on the back burner for me. Although if I had seen a band do a great version of it, it probably would have brought it right back to the front burner. It came back for me in a very serious way in 1989 when they reformed. And then I got a chance to write about them in 1990 when their first comeback album, Seven Turns, came out. But before that, when the Dreams box set had come out, I got like super into it, and that reignited my passion and my love. And I had no idea at that point who Kirk West was, but he produced and compiled the Dreams box set, which was really influential to me in reigniting my passion and love. And then eventually, just a couple of years later, really, started becoming a friend of mine and someone I worked with. And over the last 30 years has become one of my best friends, really. And the key to me becoming an Allman Brothers insider from a regular journalist. And then his interviews that he had done in the 80s, in fact, during the period when the Allman Brothers were broken up and sort of left for dead on the side of the road, Kirk did a lot of interviews. He was going to write a book. He hadn't done the book yet. Then when they reformed, they hired him. He became an employee of the band. So he never wrote the book. And after I told him about this one, that I was starting on it, he offered me his tapes. And they just became like a gold mine. I mean, an absolute gold mine. And Mike, you mentioned listening to the audiobook. Most of those interview clips on there, there's 40 interview clips in the audiobook. Most of them are from Kirk's interviews, and you can hear him talking as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a complete tally because some of them are from my own interviews over the years as well. But a majority of them are Kirk's. So those interviews were incredible, and it's really very full circle for me that he ended up being so central to the writing of this book, which was very appropriate in my own world.
He's a kid originally from Iowa. Do you want to share with our listeners the story of when he first would have discovered the Allman Brothers? If you have heard that story, I'm sure you have.
I have, but I don't know well enough to share with you. Kirk is from Iowa, and he just was inducted, as a matter of fact, over Labor Day weekend into the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is cool. And I was just in Macon with him for a couple of days, and he's wearing an Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame baseball hat around. He's very proud of it.
Awesome.
Yeah, he's an Iowa kid. He started as a photographer. He started as sort of a hustler, drug connection guy. He's more than happy to say that. And,
late 60s and 70s. So
yeah. Yep. And he saw the Allman Brothers for the first time on a trip to Chicago, in a little club on Rush Street, and just fell in love with them. But yeah, Kirk just became, like I said, his tapes are an essential part of this. I was already doing the book. I had signed the contract. So I didn't do the book because of the tapes, but it's amazing to me now that that's the case, because I don't know what the book would have been. I mean, I would have done it. It would have been good, for sure, but it wouldn't have been what it became. It wouldn't have been as good. It wouldn't have been as fresh and new. This is my second book on the Allman Brothers, so I had to be sort of talked into it. I mean, I didn't initially see it as... It seemed crazy to me to write a second book on the Allman Brothers, but a couple friends talked me into it and explained, they had my friend Brad Talinsky, who was the editor of Guitar World for years, and my editor and a good friend, and we've helped each other with our books over the years. He was the one who really had this concept of brothers and sisters. It became quite different than he envisioned it, but he was the one who saw that there was a lot more to say about the Allman Brothers, that album and that era, that it had been sort of passed over in a weird way by history, even though it was their most successful album by far. And so he just kind of got in my ear about it, and I started poking around and decided he was right. I started running it by people I trust, including Kirk, my agent, my editor, and everybody loved the idea. So I just started, I got more and more excited about it. But again, I would have done it, but I don't know what it would have been without Kirk's tapes, because they became so central, and they were filled with so much new information. And the guys in the band were, I think it was significant that they were broken up during the time they were doing the interviews. They didn't see getting back together on the horizon, and so they weren't really being political in a way, but they were actually kinder and more generous towards each other, because I think they were in a period where they were pretty wistful. They were really aware sort of what they had given up, what they had lost when the Allman Brothers went away, and they were very clear-headed about it. So, for instance, Greg talking about Dickie and being very open to how great Dickie was and how important he was to his success in that era. Later, when they were back together over a period of years, things got tense between them to the point that in 2000, Dickie was out of the band. And so it was hard to get them to be so honest about each other's strengths, whereas they would focus more on each other's weaknesses. It's just like, yeah, I mean, they were in a very good place in terms of that with each other. And Kirk didn't have the depth of relationship with them at that point that he came to have, but he already did have a really intimate relationship with them. He had photographed them. He did all these interviews over. They weren't like an hour on the phone. He was out on the road with Greg for days at a time. He was staying at Butch's Trucks' house. He was staying at Dickie Betts' house. So it's a different type of interview that you get in those situations. So these interviews were just an absolute goldmine. I can't say enough about them.
Yeah, and I'm so glad I did listen to the audio version. I'd recommend it to anybody, because you do hear those tapes from like the 1980s. And my favorite chapter of the book, I'm not as big into the Allman Brothers as you guys, and I always kind of brag about how little I know about the Grateful Dead. But my favorite chapter from far was, and I went back and listened to it again today a second time, was the Watkins Glen's chapter, where they were just like, you could hear in their voice the awe of seeing 600,000 people there. And then I kind of looked, and like you said, like, it's like 1 out of every 350 Americans at the time was at that concert, and some historians claim it might be the largest gathering of people in the history of the United States. So it
is hard. Yeah, thank you. I think that that's an example. I had a rough idea of the outline of the book as I started, but a lot of things became more in-depth than anticipated. So, for instance, Watkins Glen became 2 chapters. I mean, I knew I was going to write about it. I thought it would be a chapter. But it was so rich. There was so much there. And I love those chapters, too. So thank you for pointing them out. And it's funny. I wrote the chapters, and they felt pretty good. I mean, I had stuff from everyone in the Allman Brothers. I had stuff from guys in the Grateful Dead. I had crew members, Sam Cutler, manager of the Grateful Dead, who was key to making it happen. Bunky Odom, the Allman Brothers day-to-day manager, who was key to making it happen. I had stuff from Bill Graham, the promoter who was involved, the actual promoters of the show, guys in the band. I mean, it was really thorough. But it still felt a little off to me, and I realized that what I didn't have was the voice of the crowd. And in a sense, the crowd really was the story, and the bands were just the vehicle to get the crowds there. People didn't remember the music so much as the whole event. And so I put out a call on social media, for people who were at Watkins Glen to get in touch with me. And I thought I'd hear from a few people, and I would call them up and do interviews. I don't know if it got shared onto like a Watkins Glen attendee Facebook page or something or what, but I got just inundated. I mean, I got dozens, hundreds maybe of responses. It was a little overwhelming. So I thought, well, I can't interview all these people, but I want to hear their stories. So I wrote sort of a form letter and sent it back to everyone saying, thank you for getting in touch. Please describe your Watkins Glen experience in a paragraph. So thinking that I would pick a few and then do the interviews. But these stories were so great. I mean, I could have written a whole oral history just on Watkins Glen without quoting anyone from the actual bands. So I had to pick and choose. I left a lot of great stuff out, but I think I felt so good when I started plugging that stuff in, because I think that did bring it to life. And the stories are wild. It's not just the number of people there, but the number of people who were really young, like 14 to 17, and people who are like our kids' age or younger, I think they couldn't conceive of it. I mean, I was a pretty loose parent, I'm pretty free range with my kids. I let them run free. But the idea of them going to something like that when they were 14, no, there's no way. Not even close. And I'm about as loose as any responsible parent gets. And it's like not even close to being something that would happen. So, it's amazing. And I talked to a lot of those kids. Some of them went with their older sisters or brothers. Some of them snuck out. There were some people who got busted by their parents and, had tickets but couldn't go, or, parents figured out what was doing. But there were a lot who went. And I just loved all their stories. They were truly amazing. And nobody died there. I think that's worth saying. It's actually a small miracle.
Well, and the sound system was great. Thanks to had no idea the Grateful Dead's crew was just, they just sounded like they're inventing stuff right out there in the field. And
yeah, they really pioneered live audio. So everybody who goes to a concert, you might hate the Grateful Dead or never have listened to them or whatever. You owe them a debt of gratitude because they completely changed the approach to live audio, and they made it good, basically. So if you go to a Taylor Swift or a Beyonce show, might seem to have nothing to do with the Grateful Dead, but I'm pretty sure that they're using audio innovations that those guys did that make playing in a stadium something that could actually happen in a way that wasn't atrocious.
We could talk to you for hours about the book and about the Allman Brothers and about music in the 70s. But the real reason we invited you here today was we want to do which decade did it better, the 1970s or the 1980s, with small market baseball teams winning the World Series. And so for the 70s, we've picked the 1979 Pittsburgh Pirates to be the representative of a small market team winning the World Series. And for the 80s, we picked Mike and I's hometown Minnesota Twins, the 1986 Minnesota Twins. And we're just going to kind of share some stories about our memories of the World Series because they would have been in our childhood. And I've got some tail of the tape stuff to go through. And then at the end, we'll boil it down and see which decade did it better, the 70s or the 80s.
Well, I want to start it up. Which team do you think had the biggest characters on it? Because both those teams, the Pirates they had Kent, Detective Dave Parker, Willie Stargell. Both teams had Burt Blyleven on it.
That's the common tie.
Phil Garner, Manny Sanguin. Remind me some of the characters on the 87 team.
So the 87 Twins the biggest one would have been Kirby Puckett.
Right.
Him and Blyleven are the only two that made the Hall of Fame out of that group. Otherwise, then it's like Gary Gaetti and Tom Bernansky and Kent Herbeck. Frank Viola was probably the ace of the staff. But they only won 85 games in the regular season and surprised us all, I think, by beating the Tigers. Having gone through the 70s with 4 Viking Super Bowl losses, we weren't expecting the Twins to beat the Tigers, not with Jack Morris and the crew that the Detroit Tigers had, just a few years after they had that 35-5 start. So we were surprised that the 87 Twins made it through the playoffs to the World Series.
And I went to the University of Michigan, so I was not a Tigers fan per se, but I was around the Tigers. I was around Michigan, and a lot of my friends were Tigers fans and were devastated by that loss. It was not a happy time around there. The 79 Pirates were sort of one of the peaks of my youth. I was born in 66, so I was 13. Through most of my childhood, through the 70s, the Pirates were a good team, often a great team. They won the World Series, of course, in 71. One of my earliest memories, was all the kids having a parade down my street. We put streamers on our bikes and stuff when the Pirates won in 71.
Did you guys all wear pillbox hats?
Oh, no, they didn't have the pillbox hats. That was 79. They didn't have those in 71. They had the yellow hats mostly, and I certainly had one. I still have one. And then, Roberto Clemente died the next year, and that's one of my earliest memories, very unhappy memory. I mean, it was, the city of Pittsburgh was completely devastated and in mourning, and it was like the whole city was a funeral. I don't know how long that lasted. To my youthful memory, I mean, I was quite young. It just lasted for a long time. But then they remained competitive and good, and they there were some things that people were proud of. Dave Parker, by the way, wrote a great book called Cobra about a year ago. I read that. It's super fun, certainly for a Pirates fan, but I think for any fan of 70s baseball. Interesting, and it's interesting to me because Pittsburgh, the Pirates were the first team to have an all-black, to start 9 black players. Which is pretty amazing. And Dave Parker writes at length in his book about how black players liked playing in Pittsburgh, which is fascinating to me. Pittsburgh is not, and certainly wasn't at that point, the most racially diverse or tolerant place. But somehow the baseball team was and had this culture, which is cool to know now. And, I just loved the Pirates. 79, of course, was our City of Champions year. Steelers won the World Series. Steelers won the Super Bowl. The Pirates won the World Series. Willie Stargell and Terry Bradshaw were the Sportsmen of the Year of Sports Illustrated when that really meant something. And we're on the cover with the City of Champions. I had that framed up on not framed, but taped up on my wall. And, Willie...
The Pittsburgh Penguins changed their colors to black and yellow that year, I think, for the first time, right?
Pittsburgh Steelers changed their colors to black and gold on national TV. I think maybe at halftime of the Super Bowl or before one of the World Series games or something. I mean, at that point, when the Penguins are huge. I mean, with the younger generation, they might be the most popular team in Pittsburgh. When I was a kid, they were very, very much a third team. No one paid that much attention to them. They weren't that good. There were, of course, hardcore hockey fans, but it wasn't otherwise too mainstream. And that was a brilliant move. They went from the blue and white to the black and gold with great hurrah. And it is something cool about Pittsburgh. I don't think there's any other city where all the teams share
I don't believe so.
a color code. And so it's a cool thing that everyone there takes pride in. Everything was a little more accessible in that era. I mean, I grew up in the city. I went to high school with Willie Stargell Jr. I played Little League with him. Willie came to our games a couple of times and was playing games against Willie Jr. And it was like the most unbelievable thing. Everybody struck out because we were all trying to hit home runs. Like it was the biggest dream in the world to hit a home run while Willie was there. So everybody was swinging out of their shoes. We must have been like 0-0 games because every single kid is coming up and just taking the biggest hacks in the world. But yeah, Willie was just a huge, larger than life figure who also was of life because we would see him around, and that's different, I think, than what came even by the 80s and certainly after the 80s. And yeah, it was that World Series was a peak thing for me. The weekend of the home games in Pittsburgh was my bar mitzvah. Wow. All I wanted to do for a bar mitzvah present was go to a game. And they played Friday night and then Saturday afternoon of my bar mitzvah. And my parents wouldn't let me go because all these relatives had come in. And one of my uncles who worked for LA Times, I think, he was in the media, showed up with tickets for the World Series. And my brother and one of my cousins got to go with him. And I was just devastated. But it also was a weird series because the Pirates lost all 3 games at home and won all 4 in Baltimore. So I would have been to a loss anyhow. But it's all I wanted. And it's amazing. And you talk about what did better. The one difference, so 79 to 87 is only 8 years apart, right? But go up on YouTube and pull up the deciding game of the 79 World Series, which I'll admit to having occasionally watched. And not only, I mean, the game is, great fun for me still, but the field in Baltimore is like, you won't believe it. It's such a sloppy mess. I mean, it's like dirt. I mean, it might as well be like 1930 or something. I think by 87, things are starting to look a little more familiar to what we think of now. I mean, you won't believe it. The field is the stadium is awful. The field is a mess. Three River Stadium was no picnic either, but it was artificial turf, so at least it wasn't like huge patches of mud and dirt in the outfield like it was in Baltimore.
Yeah, if you ever go on YouTube and watch the Lake Placid 1980 Olympics, that the rink is all blue because it's got like leaking antifreeze. I mean, it's a mess.
Yeah, and it's in like a field house, basically.
Yeah. So I just want to say, Alan, who do you think was more handsome, John Candelaria or Kent Tetukla? Which pitcher was more handsome for the Pirates?
Kent Tekulve.
Jacoby, I can't say his name.
Yeah, I guess it depends if you favor skinny or beefy.
He was 6'4" and 180 pounds. Is that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why you look like a pipe cleaner. That's not even possible.
Yeah, and speaking about music, his theme song when he came out of the bullpen was "Rubber Band Man."
Oh wow.
Yeah, because he threw sidearmed and he looked like a rubber band. I mean, there's no better. I don't know who the Rubber Band Man was about. I guess it's probably a sexual thing. I don't really know. But
Man, you never heard a sound like a rubber band. Man, you're bound to lose control when the rubber band starts to jam. Oh, this dude is out of sight. Everything he does.
It could have been written about Kent Tekulve. It was just perfect. John Candelaria, not a handsome man. But,
he looks like whenever you see his baseball cards, he looks like he was at the Watkins Glens Festival because his eyes, he can't open his eyes on any of his pictures. He's just like, but it was the 70s. It was a different time. But
no, he was not on the 79 team, but another 70s. Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay.
No, he was. I'm saying another 70s Pittsburgh Pirates icon is Doc Ellis. Who of course is famous for throwing a no-hitter supposedly while tripping on LSD.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he did manage to hit 5 batters. So that's a great.
And the Pirates had Dale Berra. Go ahead.
Cartoon. Yeah, Dale Berra was a little later, but yeah, Dale Berra was involved in the 80s Pirates cocaine trials.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
In which the Pirate Parrot was the dealer. I guess he was, could just bring in anything.
How come you haven't written a book about this shit, Alan? This is a book waiting to happen. I mean.
That would, yeah, exactly. That's another change too between that era and now. When my daughter played for the Pep Band when the 2019 Final Four. And she got to U.S. Bank Stadium where it was being held. They searched through everyone's instruments, including like the horns of the tubas, as the pep band was going into the stadium. I mean, it's so much more. We're so strict with security now compared to like in the 70s or 80s. Even
compared to 2000, anything before 9/11. But yeah, certainly the 70s or 80s when. Yeah, anyone could have brought anything in. And remember, they did occasionally, they had to stop like the bat giveaways because people would throw the bats at players. And, people. Dave Parker somehow became a target of people of ire in Pittsburgh because he signed, I think it was $1 million contract, which I think was like a multi-year $1 million contract. It seemed like so much money and people resented him. And there definitely was some racism involved in that, but people had thought nothing about throwing batteries at players. So it wasn't all, not all of the old days were the good old days.
No, we just cherry picked the memories and remember the good ones.
Yeah.
Should Dave Parker be in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, Dave Parker should definitely be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. It bothers me that he's not. And Al Oliver also. I think Al Oliver did most of his damage in the American League, actually. But he was a great player for the Pirates in my youth. And I thought both those guys were incredible hitters. I mean, if they played now, they would be just beyond giant. And, Dave Parker had a bad knee from high school football. He was a great football player in high school. He had a bad knee injury then. And, of course, medicine wasn't what it was. And he played his career on that horrible artificial turf at Three River Stadium and elsewhere. and I'm sure that hampered him of a lot of his incredible athleticism.
Yeah, I remember the All-Star game. He threw somebody out from right. He threw somebody out at home from right field, which was just it was like he had to do a gravity check after that to see why the. And my favorite baseball pitcher always, and we used it as one of our promotional pictures, is Dave Parker smoking in the dugout. I just love that picture.
Yeah,
it's just
it wasn't so uncommon. Right, I mean, even I remember seeing Jim Bibby was another great Pirate pitcher. He would often smoke in the dugout, and even like as late as in the '90s, Jim Leland smoked in the dugout when he was manager. But he at least tried to hide it. He would sort of cup his hands. You know, the other guys just sit there and smoke.
Okay, so me and Alan can talk Pirates all day. Brian, what do you got for the Twins? Why don't you break in?
Well, I'm happy to listen to the Twins. That was kind of a Cinderella team for here in the Twin Cities. It's huge. We remember those 2 years, 87, and they won again in 91. And that's the 91 Twins. That's the last time I think any Minnesota teams even made it to the finals. And unless the North Stars played the Penguins in the Stanley Cup sometime in that time
91.
frame.
Yeah,
91.
Right in there,
Yeah, but after the Twins won that World Series, so we haven't had any major of the four major sports teams we have here return back. My favorite memory of the 87 Twins and why it's so big in mine is I did get to go to Game 7, and it was the volume in there. So I was 17. The volume in there was just unbelievable, and the atmosphere, and I mean, it's going to be one of my handful of sports memories I carry with me my entire life. I had the Homer hanky and ticket stub, which I have misplaced, which is always kind of frustrating because you like to carry those mementos through. And now nowadays you go to a concert, you don't keep the concert ticket because you had it on your in your Apple wallet.
Yeah, I'm not too good at keeping stubs, and I do regret that now looking back. I definitely would. If I could do it again, I would have thrown them all in a box or something. Certainly concerts, at least, and most memorable baseball games.
Yeah.
The best sporting event, best baseball game and sporting event I would say I ever went to was the 2013 wild card game, the Pirates and Reds. It was the first time that they had been in the playoffs since '92. In fact, it was the first time they had a winning record since '92. They set a record for the most consecutive non-winning seasons in any North American team sport. And so it had gotten pretty disheartening. 2013 was really exciting. My dad got a pair of tickets, and I drove from New Jersey to Pittsburgh. I was very busy. I think I was just finishing up one way out, so I really couldn't stay. My kids were pretty little, and so I drove there and back the next morning. But the event was... there was such natural enthusiasm. It wasn't like scoreboard clap your hands or generated stuff. It was true joy, excitement, passion, and then we won the game. But it was incredible. Then after the game, walking back, we always park downtown, and you can walk across the Roberto Clemente Bridge from PNC Park into downtown, and some lunatic jumped off of the bridge into the river in a celebratory style. To be clear, he emerged. It was fine, but it's not a low bridge. I mean, I would never jump off that bridge unless someone was chasing me or it was on fire. So,
or both.
But that didn't seem surprising in the moment because the passion and the fever was so high.
That's the one thing that sporting events have, because you don't know the outcome, that you can get that true crowd electricity that you don't get
that one
going
would be
to a
hard
movie.
to ever match again, I think, because it was so long. How long is that from 1992 to 2013? 21 years.
21 years,
And,
right? A person born in 92 could have drank in 2013.
Yeah. So the excitement and the joy was just off the charts.
When the Twins made the playoffs in '87, my dad went to a Ticketmaster location to stand in line to buy tickets. You would do it through the computers like you do now. And then someone got through to Ticketmaster on a payphone, and then some people got on that line and kept putting quarters in there, and that's how we got playoff tickets, was through the phone and the line to Ticketmaster. And people now have no idea how we would go and wait in lines for concerts or ball tickets or anything like that in the 70s.
Yeah, that reminds me of in college. Like I said, I went to the University of Michigan, and the Michigan Student Union had a ticket outlet there, and I had a friend who you couldn't sleep overnight there because they locked the building at some point. I had a friend who was so determined to be the first in line to get tickets for Bob Seger at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit that he went and hid in the bathroom. He knew when they would come and sweep the place, and he hid in the bathroom. He squatted on the toilet so that no one could see his feet when they came in. And once it was all locked up, he just went out and slept on the floor at the ticket outlet, which was down in the basement there. So when they came to open up, there he was, and he got his tickets.
Yeah, wow. Bob Seger's a Michigan. I think he's an Ann Arbor native, isn't he?
He's an Ann Arbor native and a definite Michigan icon.
I drift back in time and I find my feet down on Main Street.
Well, that was the time. My brother is a big Pittsburgh fan, and that was about the time it happened. Was the Lynn Swann, that half falling down catch against the Cowboys in the Super Bowl, and then when the Pirates went to the World Series in '79, he's become a Pittsburgh fan to where about every 2-3 years he'll have someone take him out there. He's seen Penguins games and he's seen Pirates games.
Oh, that's great. Well, yeah, I mean, for me, sports-wise, the 80s were sort of a lost cause. The Pirates were not very good. The Steelers were not very good. I went to college. I didn't have a TV or anything. Obviously, we didn't have the internet. And so I just was reduced for a while to just sort of checking box scores. I certainly never quit being aware of them. But it's much easier to fall off paying attention when the teams you care about are no good. And there's been periods where I've sworn off. I said, I'm done with this. Football is hard for me to defend in a lot of ways, but I still love it too much. I remember with the Steelers, I said, football, it's too much, the concussions and everything, but I can't abandon it while Roethlisberger's still playing. So I'm going to stick it out through him. When he's done, I'm done. And then, of course, I go, well, I got to see how's Kenny Pickett going to do, So I'm more in it than ever. So I will never again say I'll quit it.
No, but there's people here in Minnesota with us after this last weekend. Both teams, the local college team and the pro team, had terrible weekends. So it's kind of like, well, my Saturdays and Sundays are free the rest of the fall.
They'll be back. I have several people close to me, including my brother-in-law, who are huge Vikings fans. For reasons have nothing to do with geography. Just they fell in love with Fran Tarkenton way back in the day when we were kids.
Good choice, yeah.
And just stuck with them. And I think the purple helps too. If you're just picking a team, it's so unusual. I mean, is there any other professional sports team that's purple?
No. Yeah. And what's weird is, so I was kind of looking at, we're talking small market Pittsburgh and Minnesota. So the weird thing is that the Steelers have won 6 Super Bowls. Minnesota has lost 4 Super Bowls, but Pittsburgh only beat Minnesota once. So you think that would happen more than that out of those 10 Super Bowls? But
I mean, I don't know which is a bigger city, Pittsburgh or Minneapolis. But Minneapolis, Minnesota teams have a bigger chunk of the country to play with, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the Dakotas and whatever, all this sort of upper Midwest stuff. In the original early sports teams, they're all sort of hemmed in. Pittsburgh has Cleveland to the west, Philadelphia to the east, Cincinnati to the southwest, Buffalo to the north. I mean, so there's not a lot of market expansion area. It's an interesting thing. Like the Tigers, of course, have the whole state of Detroit and northern Ohio. The Red Sox and the Boston teams have all of New England, basically. But Pittsburgh is really hemmed in that way.
Well, I remember that was one of the original arguments when Minnesota built the Dome Stadium in 82 was for the people that would drive down from North Dakota or from South Dakota or come up from Iowa and they come in and then the game rained out that day, so we had a covered stand. But then
People from North Dakota and Iowa should be able to withstand some tough weather, if you ask me. Their daily life.
All right, so guys, before we get out of here, I was going to do I invented a little trivia game here. Alan's book's called Brothers and Sisters. So I took 4 rock groups. We kind of talked about a few of them. 2 of them are brothers, 2 of them are sisters. And I'm going to ask you if you guys are both super overqualified for this game. So I had to kind of dumb it up a little bit just because it'd be too easy for you guys otherwise. So the 4 groups I got, of course, I got the Allman Brothers, I got the Doobie Brothers, and then we already talked about, for the sisters, I got Sister Sledge, which we already talked about, which I thought would be appropriate for today's show. And I got Twisted Sister, since we had to get one 80s group in there, I mean, we couldn't just crap all over the 80s like that. So I have 4 questions. I'm just going to ask you these questions. You just kind of match it up what the group is. So the first question I have here is, in a 1978 double episode of What's Happening, I know everybody remembers that show. What's Happening
Doobie
in
Brothers.
January of 1978, one of these groups appeared on a 2-part episode of that.
Yeah.
So that's my first question. So you got to
It's
match
the
one of those
Doobie
groups with
Brothers, and I
that.
can even describe the episode. They bootleg a concert on a boombox, and then the Doobie Brothers come to the cafe where they all hang out to take the tape back and explain to them why it's wrong.
Hello there. The Doobie Brothers room, please. And I'll speak with any doobie who do be in.
Hello there. I be Roger Thomas. Which doobie you be?
And I love the episode. I just found out today the episode was called Doobie or Not to Be. Doobie. So I love that
And
name.
I wish I could tell you why, but I watched that episode on YouTube not that long ago.
I watch it all. I think of that episode all the time, and I don't know why. I think it's like the first show I consciously became
Well,
aware
speaking of
it.
other great sitcoms of Black American history, at the O'Teal Burbridge show the other night at the Capitol Theater afterwards, I went backstage to say hi and bye to my friends, and guess who was back there hanging out with him? John Amos.
Oh.
It's a great actor who, of course, was the father on Good Times.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting off tangent. Go ahead.
So-
Next one.
So, of course, that was too easy. I knew you guys would get that. So my second question was, which one of those 4 groups had an actor from Animal House in 2 of its music videos?
I'm going to guess Twisted Sister because for sure it wasn't the Allman Brothers, and it doesn't seem like something that would happen with Sister Sledge. So
Yep, it was Mark Metcalf who played the ROTC officer Douglas Niedermeyer in Animal House. And remember, he's the one yelling at the little kid at the beginning of those.
Oh, yeah.
What do you?
I want you to tell me. No, better yet, stand up and tell the class. What do you want to do with your life? I
What is it?
we're not going to take it. I'm going to have to go watch that now when we get off.
So he's in both videos. I knew he was in
Thanks for
one. I
sending me
forgot
down
that he's
that
in
rabbit
both.
hole.
And then, so the last ones I got here is what group? I saw this in a Minneapolis nightclub in the 90s. They would come out dressed like nuns, and they would pling one of their songs, and then at the end of the song, the nuns would lift up their habits to reveal that they were wearing thong underwear. I think you guys can figure out what song that would be. All My Sisters and Me. The nuns, all my sisters.
yeah.
We are family.
Yeah, we are.
And then finally, so I kind of screwed it up. But the last one I was going to ask you guys which groups do I have their song lyrics tattooed on my back? And I was going to say it's the Allman Brothers because I have all the lyrics to Jessica tattooed on my back. And you can't say I'm lying. I'm not lying, right?
That's my go-to when someone says, "Could you sing a song?" All the lyrics correctly for $1 million, and I either go to Jessica or In Memory of Elizabeth Reed.
It's an instrumental for those listening that don't get the joke.
Then you have to hum the melody perfect pitch. Then
I lose out on that. I always wondered if Dickie Betts was like the fact that Top Gear used Jessica as their theme song, the British show Top Gear with Clarkson and May and Hammond.
I've never discussed it with him, but I know what he would say. Ka-ching. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously there's nothing offensive about that show, and absent something offensive or like bothersome, the guys are really happy. I mean, they make so much money on that. Yeah, this is something I go into a little bit in Brothers and Sisters, actually, because I realize that a lot of people, even like really serious, knowledgeable music fans, don't really understand how the financial stuff works. And, to sum up, songwriters make a lot more money than performers. So, Midnight Rider is in the Geico motorcycle commercial, which I personally thought was kind of offensive given the horrible role of motorcycles in the Allman Brothers history.
Yeah.
I think Greg loved it. Greg always continued to ride a motorcycle till almost the end, but he made a lot of money on that, and I'm sure that Dickie made a lot of money on that. So, I without ever discussed it with him, I feel really confident in saying he loved it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm naive. Maybe they did. I don't know.
All right. Well, I think we've taken up enough of your time tonight, Alan. If you ever want to come back, though, and discuss the Vikings versus the Steelers ABC Superstars tug-of-war, we'd be happy to have you on.
Oh, that's where we got our revenge.
Well,
that was when we got
video
our
on that.
Yeah, the video is like 35 minutes, and most of it is just really worn out football players laying in the sand.
Is that where they're in a stalemate for like 25 minutes?
Yeah, for a long time.
And that's going to do it. That's another episode, my babies. And I'd really like to thank you for joining us, but mostly I'd like to thank Alan Paul for his book, Brothers and Sisters, the Allman Brothers Band. And I wish I would have thought of this, but he said he took some heat for calling it the inside story of the album that defined the 70s. Well, there's a couple chapters in there about Jimmy Carter. There's a couple chapters in there about Cher. And there's a couple chapters in there about a roadie doing jail time for the lead singer. If that's not the 1970s, what is it? I'd also like to thank Brian Malika for producing this very special episode. And I would love for all of you, I'm leaving a link in the show notes for SpeakPipe. Just click on that, leave us a voicemail, and you may hear yourself in the next episode. And speaking of the next episodes, we got some crazy ones. We had a couple of special ones planned out for Halloween that you're not going to want to miss. They're going to be really crazy, really fun. So thank you for joining us, and this has been the 70s versus the 80s.